start today. I'm Chris Bennett and I'm your MC for today, and I run a fairly tight ship. If you think I'm being rude to the guest speakers, I have okayed it with them that I can make rude noises if they go over their time and jump up and down and do something or other to get their attention. Firstly today I'd like to acknowledge our First Peoples. Glenn? Thank you. As we meet, we acknowledge the Muwinina people, the traditional owners of this land. We pay respect to those that have passed before us and acknowledge today's Tasmanian Aboriginal community as custodians of this land. I'm really pleased to welcome some official guests here. To start with, Andrew Wilkie, MHR, Ella Haddad. I actually think Ella's outside being gazumped by the media. Rob Valentine, MLC, Helen Burnett, Deputy Lord Mayor of Hobart City Council, Councillors Sue Hickey, Bill Harvey and Beth Warren, and Emily Mallett is representing Guy Barnett, MHA. We have a few apologies. The Honourable Julie Collins, MP, who's the Federal Minister for Housing, Alderman Anna Reynolds, Lord Mayor of Hobart, Rosalie Woodruff, Greens MHA for Franklin, Alderman Beck Thomas, Lord Mayor of Glenorchy, Alderman Kelly Sims from the Glenorchy Council, Cassie O'Connor from MHA, from the Greens. I'm pleased also to welcome our two guest speakers today. When we first started, we looked at the list of heaps of people that we could have invited, and through talking to people, we discovered that these two have a wealth of knowledge between them, and that's why I'm going to have to jump up and down after 20 minutes, because I think both of them could talk a lot longer than that. So we have Belinda Clark, who's the Executive Manager of Centrecare Evolve Housing and St Joseph's Affordable Housing. Welcome to you, Belinda. And Don McRae from the Salvation Army Housing and Homelessness Services. Welcome to you, Don. But most importantly, I want to welcome all our guests here today. This group started by some members of this church and is supported by this church, but has now expanded well beyond this church and its members, and is open to anybody who feels that they would like to do something to help address a growing concern. It's not just a yummy soup and sandwich, which mine was extra yummy. It's not just a talk fest. This afternoon is a result of a group of people who are concerned about the growing number of women over 50 becoming homeless in Hobart. We acknowledge that there are many other people that are homeless. We also acknowledge that there are many people that are having many difficulties in all sorts of forms. But we felt strongly that we wanted to address this particular issue. We can't spread ourselves too thinly, and we felt that we might make a better impact if we really focused on this issue. We're very aware that there are many organisations addressing the issue of homelessness in lots of different ways, but none of us really knew exactly what was happening, how it was happening, and where there might be gaps. So today we've got this forum together because it's a fact-finding time. It's an information gathering time. It's a time for putting some things together and planning some action. I shouldn't tell you that you're not going to get out that door until we've got some action items on the list, because I'm all for action. So the format for today is each of the speakers are going to speak for 20 minutes. Then after each of them, we're going to have a 10-minute question and answer that you may ask them a question, and we ask that you stay on topic, because they probably will allude to other things that they're involved in, but as I've said, we're here for one topic. So both of them will do 20 minutes, 10-minute question and answer. After that, we're going to ask that you might just have a little natter with the people that are near you and come up with 3 to 5 things that you have had pop into your head that could be action items. We're going to ask you to write those on the board. If another group writes something on the board and you like it, I'm going to get you to put a red asterisk beside it, because by the end of the day, we might have 3 action plans there that have got a whole heap of red stars beside it. Or we could have 45 actions. We'll see. So after that, then our group leader, David Reeve, will close up the proceedings for the day and he's going to invite you to then join us for the next step if you choose to. But my immediate plan is to really thank you for your attendance and your input. You're not just sitting there. Thank those that provided the yummy soup, and to thank those who put this forum together. It takes more than just a flick of a pen. And it is my pleasure to welcome our first speaker for today, Belinda Clark. Thank you, Belinda.
Thank you, Chris. Are we right there? I can go? Sorry if I buzz. Firstly, I would like to reiterate an acknowledgement of country to the Muwina people, and just to say that across Australia, including in Tasmania, our Indigenous peoples are overrepresented in homelessness, and that we need to be really conscious of this in any of our solutions that address housing stress and homelessness. So I acknowledge the Muwina people and their elders past, present, and those that will continue along the journey. So in terms of my response today, I've been invited to give a perspective of what we're doing across the Catholic housing entities. So I'm going to give a very, very brief overview of who we are and what we do, and then to really drill into what we see presenting to us across our agencies, and then to talk about Chris Solutions, because I know and I really commend the Uniting Church community here for opening their doors and saying, what can we do? And I think that that is a question that is happening across the state. People saying we didn't always have people, so many people that were facing homelessness, that were couch surfing, and that were in housing stress. I'm then going to share a little bit of a Q&A that I did with one of the women that I know, Kay, who found herself in her 50s in housing stress. And I'm going to talk about what our involvement with Kay was. So I'll put a little clip which is about 3 minutes and then open up for Q&A. So in terms of what Catholic housing is doing at the moment, there's a few different entities. Just very briefly, Catholic Care Tasmania is the social services arm, and they provide a whole range of what people often call wraparound supports. This includes things like emergency relief, so people presenting who are in high financial stress. We provide a lot of counselling, mental health support, and we also provide, in terms of homelessness, one of the services for the Housing Connect. And you'll hear a little bit about Housing Connect in my conversation and talk today, and I'm sure with Don as well. So that's Catholic Care. We support about 11,000 people across the state each year. What we're seeing is increasing numbers of people and changing cohorts of people coming to our door in need of assistance. We track the presenting issues, and this year for emergency relief, or in the last 12 months, homelessness was our number 2 issue, which is a growing concern. So when people are saying, is it growing? It is growing. We know that the number of people who find themselves living in housing stress and unable to pay for rent is growing. And as we all know, the cost of living is going to increase. So how's that going to impact the people who are already struggling to make ends meet? So that's Catholic Care. Centacare Evolve Housing is our community housing provider. It's a Tier 1 community housing provider. And what that means is that we manage the social housing stock and a portfolio across the state for social housing as well as affordable housing. So there is a difference between social housing and affordable housing. And social housing is the housing that comes through the Housing Connect, so the government organised list of people in need of social housing. Affordable housing is housing that we provide for people on low incomes. It's means tested, but it also has reduced rates and includes a whole lot of supports. At Centacare Evolve Housing, we have over 5,000 people that we support in our houses and homes across the state, which is massive. And we've grown significantly. We're 8 years old, and we have a very, very strong commitment to building. So our probably key piece of work in terms of how are Catholic housing entities addressing or looking at their contribution, our contribution is around building new stock. So we are doing this in Hobart, we're doing this across Tasmania. we see that that is something that we can bring to the table, more stock. The other key piece of work that Senecare Evolve Housing does is putting a community wellbeing, social impact approach into the way that we support our tenants. And that's about not just a roof over their head, it's housing first definitely, but then making sure there's the right supports in place for people. Not everyone needs support, but many people do, whether that be things like financial counselling, whether that be help with maintaining a tenancy, whether it's employment support. So we run a whole lot of programs where we focus on the tenant and the wellbeing supports that they require. And we do that to over 5,000 people across the state. Our largest cohort, our focus area, is in Hobart's northern suburbs, and that's because that's where the original stock that we started to manage with the Tasmanian government was, in Hobart's northern suburbs. But what we're seeing across the state is increasing calls for people and communities to bring more social housing, more affordable housing into their areas, including in Hobart. And we get this all the time. Can we build stock? And the state government's put a lot of energy and a strategy around increasing the stock in Hobart. And we also, across Catholic Housing, look at what we can do. Where are there assets that we can leverage within Hobart? Because we know, and this is why this conversation is happening today, that there are many people and women for this conversation who are in need of safe and affordable housing within Hobart. That's Senecare Evolve Housing. The other entity that I represent is St Joseph Affordable Homes. So we, in 2020, the Catholic Church has set up its own building and construction company to build the houses for Catholic Care and Senecare Evolve Housing, as well as other mission-aligned organisations. And in terms of that, our commitment is to alleviate homelessness and to provide employment outcomes for young Tasmanians. So St Joseph Affordable Homes, since starting in 2020, has built over 111 homes in southern Hobart, primarily in the southern regions around Hobart, and we've also put on 18 young apprentices. And that's another key piece of work long-term that we're doing. We are providing employment training for local young people, and these are the children of some of the women who are in their 50s. We are providing employment outcomes so that they can get an income. We have a few of our apprentices who are now living in homes that they have built or helped build, which is amazing. So these are young people coming out of social housing or coming out of situations of high vulnerability that we've supported into employment, and they're now living in homes that they've helped build. So that's St Joseph Affordable Homes. So that across, as you can see, the Catholic agencies have made a very, very intentful commitment to say, how can we live out our mission? One of the key ways, not the only way, but one of the key ways that we're doing it is in the housing space, and with a particular focus on building homes so that we can bring in the wraparound supports to improve individual, family and community wellbeing. Okay, so the journey into housing stress and homelessness. People often say, how do you end up in being in a situation of homelessness? And for us today, how do women who are over 50, and if I think about that, that's me in 3 years, how do women our age end up in housing stress? Now, everyone's journey is different, and there's no one pathway, but some of the common issues that we are seeing in Hobart is, one, women who need to leave situations of family violence. So that's the number one reason across Australia, including in Hobart, for why women are ending up in situations of housing stress and homelessness. The second key reason is money. Women cannot, and this isn't gender specific, but people cannot afford the rent prices that are being asked for. As an example, a woman I was speaking to this week was living in a home, the house has been sold, she was in an independent granny flat or living unit, that's no longer available. She cannot afford to find a rent within her means. So conversation with me, she needs to go through Housing Connect and get herself assessed and on that in that process. There's many, many reasons, but they're the two key ones that I would say sitting here in Hobart are the reasons. Lack of affordable housing, and then women having to leave situations where they're unsafe, be that through physical or emotional violence. It is a sad situation. Women often spend their lives caring for their family and they don't have savings. So when we say financial reasons, they don't have a savings bank that they can afford 4 weeks bond, as an example. They can't put up a deposit to buy something. They go and ask for a loan at my age for 30 years without a huge savings. It's very, very difficult. So what can we do? So what's possible? One of the things I will say, Chris, on solutions is it does take effort across all the agencies. It does take effort from across all levels of government. Tasmanian state government has put in significant amount of help and support and are looking at solutions across the state. We are very, very fortunate and we talk to our counterparts across Australia, and our state government has put huge investment into how much stock we're putting in. There is always need for more. With 4,000 people on the wait list, we know that there's more stock that's required. So what's happening in Hobart and why is it appearing and feeling like it's worse? One of the reasons, if you think of the journey into homelessness, one of the pathways is crisis accommodation, transitional accommodation, and then permanent housing. We know that in our crisis accommodation, and Hobart Women's Shelter have been quite vocal about this and put out a lot of data, that they have turned away, I think in 18 months, 19 months, 1,600 women and children who are in need of crisis accommodation or present in need of crisis accommodation. They may not all be in need of crisis accommodation, but they need accommodation. So they're inundated. They can't move them out of their crisis accommodation, which is meant to be a very short term, into transitional or permanent because there's less stock. So we're saying, as Catholic Housing, let's build more stock. Let's put out more, and we're doing this. And conversations on the ground, I was speaking to one of the caseworkers this week, and I said, well, how does it feel? Does it feel like it's getting any better? And she said, with the permanent housing for women over 50 that's Seneca Evolve Housing has put on, and I'm at Claremont, and I can see Minister Wilkie, yourself there, that you're very supportive with the Hobart City deal that went on, that we've put in a development for 50 homes in Claremont for people over 55. That has made a difference. So we are transitioning people out of crisis and out of transitional into these permanent houses. There's also Bellerive, the Winteringham development is an amazing development that's also helping to unblock the people that are in crisis or transitional housing. So for me, build more stock. Now, you sitting in the room, what can you do at any building? I'm not sure, but you can support where there's land. So we, as Catholic agencies, have looked at properties. Where do we have land that's available? And a very clear example of this is at South Hobart. We, St Francis Xavier Church, had an old unused primary school at the back of the church. We have repurposed that. So with support from government, we have repurposed that into 8 units for women over 50. So that is now a transitional accommodation facility, and that's making a difference. So we can now offer that facility. We then transition them into places like, as I said, Seneca Evolve Housing's development at Claremont. So that's what we did, one example. There's many, many others. Where you know that there are assets that are underutilised in Hobart, start having those conversations about what can be done. Start talking to people that own land about looking at social housing. We've worked with different, not just Catholic, different church agencies and other organisations to build on land that they have and to give back return. So one of the homes, as an example, they can rent as affordable housing and get rental income for on land and on houses that we build. So that's one thing that I think we all need to be advocating for. Where there's unused, underutilised land within Hobart, what can be done for social housing and affordable housing options? Okay, I'm going to now just switch to talking to Kay. So Kay, I've known a fair while. She has been through the journey and she's going to share a piece of that. It's about a 3-minute Q&A that I did with her last week. I'm just going to say this. It was 10:30 on a Monday when we did this, and we did it outside. And I deliberately did it outside because we could go into a warm environment But actually, if you are in housing stress and homelessness, often you are sitting outside in the elements and having to deal with that. So I did this outside, so I'll get the show.
It was wonderful to have you here with us in Hobart, Kay, to get a better understanding of homelessness and the housing crisis here in Hobart, particularly for women over 50. Can you talk to me about your journey into housing stress?
My journey started in about 2007 when I had a divorce came through. I found myself in a situation that was very humiliating because I didn't have my family home anymore. I did sleep on couches and such, but I knew that I had to get somewhere of my own.
I first met you when you came to Buenos Aires in South Hobart. Tell me about that part of your journey.
I was so grateful to feel as though, like, I'm safe. I've got a secure roof over my head, and it was all clean and it was new.
You would have met a lot of different types of women in similar situations to yourself. Can you talk to me about the diversity of the people that you've met?
And I was surprised at the quality of women coming through. It was such a wide variety of reasons why they were there. And it's things that have happened maybe in their family.
Do you think that the stereotypes that are out there about people in social housing are true?
They all, I think nearly all of them had loving families who were worried about them, but who were so pleased for them to get into Buenos Aires. I made some nice friends there, just in passing. But then got the garden going, and you could see the ones who were interested in gardening or keeping the place looking nice.
Talk to me, Kay, about the benefits that you found and you saw other women found through the relationship with Parish at St Francis Xavier's.
I was so grateful for the time that I was at Buenos Aires and the parishioners of St Francis Xavier. I regained my sense of identity, having that secure roof, and the love that the parishioners showed was, it just helped me to settle down and live my life. I find now that I have my permanent little cottage, it's ticked all the boxes. I've just been grateful for anything that I was given, and everything I was given was clean and tidy. People have wanted to stop by and, and they have said how happy they are because I found somewhere nice. I don't know, if I hadn't have had the angels along the way, I call them angels, somebody to guide me to the next step. I don't know what would have happened.
Thank you so much, Kay, for opening up and being brave to tell your story, not just to me, but to other people that will be listening to what you have to say. It's so important that we all understand that homelessness and housing stress can happen to anyone. Thank you very, very much.
That's Kay, and I think we honour Kay in showing that story. She was going to come along today, but she's reconnected, which is something that often does happen now that she has permanent accommodations. She's reconnected with her daughter and is doing some grandmother duties with her daughter. She's also reconnected with her son. She's got permanent accommodation, so she's moved out of Buenos Aires, out of the transitional, and now has stable, permanent, lifelong accommodation. So it's happening. We don't need to sit here and think everyone who ends up in housing stress doesn't end up in a home. People are finding permanent safe housing, and there's a lot of hope out there. There's a lot of commitments to build more stock. There are a lot of people like all of you here today that are actually saying, we don't just want to talk about it, we actually want to do something about it. And we have government looking at what is possible, not only in Hobart but across the state. So for me, more permanent housing is definitely the answer. From a very, very personal human perspective, you saw from Kay, housing stress and homelessness can happen to anyone, and we are all vulnerable at different times in our lives. I know when I speak to people in this situation that having human contact with people who treat them in dignified ways does make a difference. When you see people who are struggling, look them in the eye, have that connection and say, hello, how are you going? Let's not talk about it, let's actually engage people and see how they're travelling and see what they think about it and talk to people. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Belinda. I've got so many questions for you, Martin, but I don't let other people ask questions. So we've got 10 minutes for question and answer, and it's going to be pretty scripted. So no long talking.
Thanks for the presentation.
It's on.
Thanks for the presentation, Belinda. That was terrific. I'm Bill Harvey, City of Hobart. And Sue here and I have been talking about possibilities.
Yep.
Hobart's provided 505 door keys for units by utilising 3 car parks in Hobart over the last dozen years or so.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been driving around Glenorchy and Moona looking at the car parks there, thinking, visualising, sorry, it won't be too long, visualising what's possible. The Hopkins Street apartments are a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
The Salvation Army 21 units are coming on.
Yep.
So let's just start off in Glenorchy. Have you approached the Glenorchy City Council to find out what the long-term objectives of the car parks are there? I didn't think it was working. And how they could potentially offer that land,
Yep.
still keeping a car park, but building units above the car park?
Yep.
Have you considered that? And Andrew would be interested too, and Sue here, so let's put you 3 together to have a chat about it. And how do we get the Glenorchy car parks into appropriate housing?
So your name, sorry?
Bill Harvey, City
Bill,
of Hobart.
thank you, Bill, for that. Well, I think the question is, have we had conversations with Glenorchy? Without divulging too much, I can say that yes, we have, and Don and I both have had conversations with Glenorchy Council and with different levels of government around what's possible in Glenorchy. Without speaking on Glenorchy Council's behalf, I can say that they are looking at it and they do have a plan to develop an approach in that space, which is excellent. And I really commend them for opening up that conversation and looking at what's possible, including with car parks. Yeah. Including with car parks, yeah. I will say the car park option isn't, it's happening across Australia, people looking at these car park options, and I think for a specific cohort, they do offer an answer in a moment of time. They're not a permanent housing solution, and I think we must continue to, while we're doing the short term, we must continue to provide long-term permanent solutions. But yeah, the parking spaces and anywhere that's warm and safe, I say halls. Look at all the people that have halls that are underutilised at night. That would be nicer than a car park, I think, some of the warm halls that are around. Yep.
Thank you for that presentation. I'm Sue Hickey. Can I just make a suggestion to all of the pollies in the room? When you are going to see councils, ask to speak to the whole council, because sometimes it gets stuck with just the mayor and the GM and it doesn't flow down to the other decision makers. But the point I wanted to make is Common Ground used to have an organisation, like they'd approach a Rotary Club to fit out one of your units. So we would fundraise, and I think it was like $8,000 to buy the toaster, the kettle. Mm-hmm. So this might be very practical for your church, where you can provide the furniture and you all turn up and screw the legs on the chairs, you make the beds, you pull the toasters out of the boxes and you put the cutlery in the drawer. Do you have some way you could work with community where you build the buildings but the actual fit out and the warm dooners, etc., is done by an organisation such as this church?
Oh, definitely. There's always opportunity to provide that type of support within the homes that we have, and we do have community groups that support us in that space, but absolutely, if that's something that Uniting Church wanted to do, whether it be with ourselves or with the Salvos, who's best placed to do that, absolutely. There's always things that are required in that space. Yeah.
Robin Nandon. I'm just interested with the person to whom we saw the
Kay.
presentation, Kay.
Yeah.
So when she was in Buenos Aires, that was a sort of an emergency accommodation?
It's called transitional.
Transition.
Yeah.
And then when she goes to the place that she's now been provided, is that... So do you still manage that, or how does it is she secure there for the rest of her life?
She is. So she is now in permanent accommodation. I'll speak on behalf of Seneca Evolve Housing. The way we do it, if someone comes in as a permanent, into permanent social housing, yes, it is, as long as they meet their rental and tenancy obligations, which we support them to do, yeah, they can stay there for as long as they need to. All our builds we do for ageing in place, so we make sure that there's capacity to change a dwelling, so we can put handrails in and things like that. We are very, very committed to, once we have someone in a home, that we can support them. We put a community wellbeing piece, I mentioned the community wellbeing program around them. Every single tenant is allocated a tenancy officer, and then they refer them to relevant referrals as required, internal or external. But yes, significant support is available if it's required.
Jane, and I'm currently homeless and have been for the last week. I was hounded out of my forever home by organised crime. I would just like to ask that in the short term, please could organisations consider doing simple things like putting shelter over the park benches, because to be ousted from a shelter at 8 o'clock in the morning in this weather and have to walk around Hobart at my age with a heavy bag and have nowhere dry to sit is exhausting.
Jane, thank you. That's brave to get up and say that, and I think people can hear the need to have dry spaces and warm spaces for people, opening up places where people can go in the short term, and happy to have a conversation with you after this as well, Jane.
Is there anybody else that wishes to add?
Thanks, Belinda. My name's Helen Burnett. I'm Deputy Lord Mayor of Hobart.
Yeah.
I know that over the last few years, this the number of people on the public housing list is growing, and it's growing at a tremendous rate, like a horrific rate. And there's obviously that transition to public-private arrangements with housing and less housing stock. We now have the Federal Housing Minister is a Tasmanian, Julie Collins, and I'm wondering what sort of conversations we as councils, Andrew and state MPs, should be having with the Federal Minister, and what you can envisage as well.
Thanks, Helen. I will say that Minister Julie Collins met with us within her first 2 weeks of becoming a minister, and we were really delighted that she did do that. That was off her own bat, coming to speak to us to say what's possible. She, in that conversation with her, what I heard was that it would be a very collaborative approach with state government and federal government. I think that is the push, that local government, state government and federal government need to be addressing this together. Where that has happened, they're good outcomes. So as an example, when we're funding some of our developments, we as Catholic Housing, we debt fund a lot of what we do. We get different types of funding for different arrangements. Let's have a look at that holistically across Tasmania. And I think where possible, get more people, but more representatives of those different levels in the room when we're looking at collaborating to address homelessness and housing stress in Tasmania. And I heard that from her, yeah.
I hope this isn't too controversial. I'm actually worried that you're building slums. I think that it's absolutely fantastic when you go inside these spaces that you have been building. They're clean and they're new and they're terrific, but there's no green space. People are in a very crammed and cramped situation. There's no sense in which the person is in a community, and I'm concerned that the speed at which you're just depositing buildings in empty land is going to create a huge social concern for the future, and I'd like you to address that.
Yeah, well, I hear what you're saying in terms of concern that there are slums being built. I will say hand on heart that we are not doing that. Our model is mixed development wherever possible. We are putting green spaces in. We are looking at yield. We do community consultation. The development that we're doing at the moment in Bridgewater has significant green space in it. We had a development down in Cygnet that's been approved, that we had community consultation as part of that process. We looked at solar orientation, we looked at green spaces. We changed the way that we were designing, hearing feedback from community like yourself, and we are very committed to mixed developments. That means we build and purchase, so we sell off. That's how we fund some of our model. We sell some, so we have people who own homes next to people in affordable housing, next to people in social housing. You don't know who's who. One of the, I suppose, bugbears I have is the need to identify which houses are social and affordable housing. I don't think we need to be doing that. I can't share which are the houses that are social housing, because I think people need their dignity. But I can tell you now we are absolutely looking at that. We have an environmental sustainability plan across Catholic entities and looking at wherever we can. At every point we ask the question about what green space is available. Some people don't want large lawns. They're requesting not to have them. So everyone is different, and we take that on board and we listen. So your concern about building slums, I honestly, from our perspective, from the Catholic housing builds that we're doing, we are definitely not doing that.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. You have 1 second.
The lady, sorry, Robin again. The lady who, Kay, so do you have gradations of rent, affordability?
Yes.
So that if somebody can't pay what somebody else can pay?
So what I've done a frequently asked questions, because I thought I might get some of these questions. So one of them is how much it all costs, how you work it out, what's the difference between social and affordable housing. So I thought I've just done these this week, so to leave here for people to get a bit of an understanding of how the system all works. But yes, it's means tested, and we have processes in place with tenancy officers if they're people are unable to pay rent. Yep.
One more question. Was there somebody over this side that was... Thank you.
My name's Fran. I'm interested in the possibility of councils freeing up some of their regulations so that people can buy a small plot of land, build a tiny house if that's satisfactory for them. I just think the council, I don't know, in the new planning scheme, whether there's any thought being put into that to make it simpler for people to do. Like a block of land, you could possibly put 3 tiny houses and people could work it out, some sort of different model.
It is being looked at, and I can't speak on behalf of councils, but the planning piece is definitely being looked at. I would advocate for fast-track planning to make sure that it can go through quickly, but I'm not going to speak on behalf of councils.
Yes, and we did introduce something at council. I mean, there's the ancillary dwellings that the state government is helping to fund, but we're also looking at making that easier to build smaller dwellings in backyards where it's suitable. In Hobart, certainly. I don't know if it's the same in other jurisdictions, but it's certainly what we've been trying to do.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Belinda, and thank you for thinking about preparing a question and answer sheet. So if your question wasn't answered, you can perhaps check it up later, or we might have time at the end to have a talk. I just wanted to ask one question, and either of you probably could answer it. Is in South Australia they have a system called Code Blue, that if the weather forecast is for the temperature to be below a certain range for 3 days consecutive, they escalate, and anyone that's homeless is guaranteed a roof over their head.
They open up bus shelters, so the Code Blue, it is a really interesting initiative that warrants looking into, I would say.
Nothing like that happens in Tasmania at this stage?
We do not have that at the moment, no.
It's in South Australia, because I noticed that some of the country areas actually bring it in as well, have a Code Blue, and it's in a lot of places in America, apparently.
It's funded through the Don Dunstan Foundation.
Yeah, Don Dunstan Foundation. Yeah.
So can we just thank Belinda very much for her contribution? Thank you. And our next speaker is Don, and I don't reckon Belinda's stolen any of his thunder because he told me he has 24 hours of stuff to share with us.
Thanks everybody for coming along today, and thanks for showing your interest in the issues that we're experiencing. I guess we talk about this in the last couple of years. We've talked about a housing crisis, but for those of us who work in and around the industry and in the sector, hasn't been so much of a crisis because it's like seeing a tsunami coming for about the last 7 or 8 years. I think I'd like to start by pointing out my approach to housing, that is that it's a fundamental human right for every Australian, without question. We've got the beautiful Kay. She's been part of the organisation that Kate over here with her companion started up. It's called Housing with Dignity, and if it wasn't for Kay being transitionally accommodated at Buenos Aires, then she wouldn't have had the capacity to go along and advocate for those who are experiencing homelessness. Now, when I first started in this sector, which was about far too long ago, probably about 30 years, we had a stereotypical idea of what homelessness looked like. It was the quintessential older gentleman in a trench coat with a paper bag with a bottle in it on a park bench. Now, when you transpose somebody in Kay's situation and other people around that age group, that same old stereotype doesn't fit anymore. I run 4 programs through the Salvation Army. They all are around housing and homelessness. One's for part of the Housing Connect that we link up with Catholic Care and a number of the other organisations. One's about working with street homelessness, so people who are experiencing primary homelessness, living on the street, in their cars, in tents, wherever the case may be. We have an issue about people exiting prison. So 50% of those people will exit prison into homelessness of one form or another, and 50% of those people will go back to prison within 2 years. We also see the growing cohort of people in prison now represented. Our fastest growing cohort is the ladies over 50. Highly represented. It's the fastest growing cohort across the homelessness sector. These people are falling through the gaps for a number of different reasons. We're seeing, yes, there's certainly domestic violence. There's opportunities where the rentals just get out of people's area of affordability. An example of somebody on a fixed income under the criteria through Housing Connect, if you're on a aged care pension or a disability support pension, you can afford $250 a week, maybe $260 at a pinch. If you're on youth allowance, forget about it, because there's nothing affordable in Tasmania. The SARC report that comes out from Anglicare each year has been diminishing in the amount of opportunities there are for people to afford a private rental accommodation. If you're on JobSeeker, you can afford around $140 to $150 a week in a rental. I don't know if anybody's been looking at private rentals for the last 5 years, but you certainly will not find anything in just about any backwater, even in Tasmania, that will fit that criteria. There is nothing affordable about private rental, and they will continue to go up. Now, the reason they'll go up is because people are buying properties, speculators are getting opportunities to buy into the market with tax concessions. Gifts to speculators push a lot of people out of the market who would otherwise be buying a home and not an investment property. So when we have a 0.25% or a 0.5% rates increase, the speculators will pass that on to the private renters. And the private renters, there's 45% of the private renters across Australia now are in rental stress. There's a similar number of people who are in mortgage stress across this country. So we see those things will push people into homelessness, and it doesn't take a lot to push people into homelessness. A number of different reasons. You know, the house can get sold from underneath you. I often say to people, you're only one good argument away from actually being homeless. You know, if the police move in and there's an altercation between the husband and wife, the partners, one of them has to go, one of them has to stay. or whatever the case may be. That can be how easy it is. For somebody to go in and have an incident, a broken hip, all of a sudden I'm in hospital having a neck or femur repaired, and I can't return to my house because it's unsuitable for me able to walk around in a walking frame. I've got steps, I can't access my own house. That's how easy it is to be forced into this sort of a situation. And unfortunately, we're seeing a very vulnerable group in our community. And yes, we're talking about females 50 plus, but we're having people who are 70s and 80s plus coming to us because they've been kicked out of their properties, because the landlord wants to sell it, or because there's a split in the investment family and somebody has to move back into it, or because it's just become too unaffordable. So we're seeing so many of the people who are pushed into this situation, who are just there through no fault of their own, not having savings enough to be able to afford a house. We're seeing so much more reliance on the housing market, and certainly the builds, and I'll just follow on from what Belinda was saying about social housing these days. There's lots of social housing you would drive past and not even recognise it. It's in our CBD, hundreds of buildings in our CBD. I think we still have this idea, this preconceived idea, that we drive around the community and we lock the doors because we're driving past the social housing. And we did that historically over a number of years, and there was a stigma attached to it. There was a stigma attached to it because we put everybody out in the burbs at the extremities of the greater Hobart area without services, without support, and we became fearful. We created a model that wasn't well conceived. Sure, we built a lot of houses and a lot of people were housed, but we've created a model that wasn't necessarily developing a community. We work very closely with Centacare Evolve Housing, as we do with Catholic Care, as we do with Mission, with Salvos Housing, and the whole narrative about how they run community housing these days is very different. It's very different because obviously the design of the properties is 7-star. The way the properties are sort of filtered around, so it's not just all community housing. This is, you know, a number of people that mix into that group that provide a whole community mix of people. They're not just people who've been forgotten about, whose support needs aren't being considered. The way the housing providers work these days is they have a social model, a social work community model. So they don't just leave people and say, well, we'll just pick up the rent at the end of the fortnight. These guys are on the front foot, and for a number of different organisations, they're in there supporting people so they learn how to get on with their neighbours. They learn how to maintain a tenancy. If there's issues about bills or disagreements, and these people have the capacity to work in the community today and alleviate some of those sort of problems. So I'm highly supportive of our community housing. They've turned the face of community housing around in the time that I've been in the sector 180 degrees. It is something that's workable now. We see the places of transitional housing like Buenos Aires. We see the people coming through there. We see the Winteringham facilities where it's changing the mix to support people who are over 50, over 55, who want a quiet life. They don't want the life where there's people doing burnouts in front of the street and all the antisocial behaviour that goes on with that. One of the issues that and Belinda and I have been banging on about these sort of issues for a number of years. You know, we've got some really good work that's coming through from the department. We had a meeting just this week that was highly constructive, and we've been asked to continue this dialogue in this forum to be able to develop strategies for the here and now. It's great to say that we're building lots of new properties, and I've got to put my hand up and say there's a lady in the front row here and Jackie Lambie, between themselves, they got the Tasmania's housing debt wiped. And that was when we had the federal minister come down and sat in our Shelter Tas office and said, under no circumstances will this happen. It's good to have the balance of power every now and again, and she used her capacity to make a change. We would have been so far behind the 8 ball if that didn't happen, because we were getting $32 million of federal support every year from the federal government. We would chop that cheque in half and send $16 million back on payments to furnish service that debt. So having that has enabled places like Senecare Evolve, Mission, Housing Choices, Salvos Housing and the like, to develop more options for people. Those options would have been better. Mr Gutwin, Premier Gutwin, said we're going to build 10,000 houses towards the end of this decade. Great, but that should have been done 20 years ago. And we're still playing catch up. When we talk about 4,000 to 4,500 people on the register or the housing waiting list, that's primary applicants. Okay, so there could be a family of 4 or 5 a dozen people sitting behind that. We're always trying to find opportunities where people fit into the pigeonholes. If you fit into the pigeonholes of being able to get yourself into a shelter, for instance, then that escalates your application to a bit of a higher level. The problem is, and I forgot the numbers, but it's roughly about 200 a month that each shelter in Hobart is turning away. Each ladies' shelter is turning away. Now, if you pigeonhole fine to work into that sort of a system, it escalates you to the top of the list, and your situation will be prioritised. But if you don't fit in that pigeonhole, i.e. if you're sleeping in your car, or if you're sleeping in overcrowded accommodation, or you're couch surfing, or you're living in safe space, or wherever the case may be, you can be the forgotten people because there's so many people out there. Just a couple of examples. We looked last week to try and find accommodation for somebody whose house had burnt down with 2 small teenage children, a mum with kids, and we can't get them into a normal accommodation. The shelters, in our sense, we talk about Gyra House, Hobart Women's Shelter, and we talk about Macomb House from Salvos. They're the ones that are turning away so many people every month. So over and above that, what our traditional emergency accommodation can look like is to look like Discovery Park or caravan parks or motel, hotel accommodation. Now, having just have half of my team over the last few days ring around, there's something called Dark Mofo on. And you cannot get a room for love nor money. We found one night's accommodation for a gentleman and his 2 kids for $350 for the night, whereas traditionally we can find that for a week if there's capacity. During COVID, we hit a perfect storm, another perfect storm, because our borders were shut. Of course, all the accommodation providers wanted to talk to us because they needed people in their facilities, and the price dropped accordingly, and everybody got JobSeeker. As easy as that, things changed. And I know there was a lot of initiatives like the Adelaide Zero project, which was developed by a guy called David Pearson, who took it to Victoria, who took it to New South Wales, and that was to address the needs of people who are sleeping rough. Now, when COVID came on, everybody was told to work from home, to self-isolate, to exclude yourself from going out for any other reason to buy food or see a doctor or whatever. So the people who are living on the street couldn't do that. In South Australia and Victoria, and to a certain extent New South Wales and Western Australia, they provided motel accommodation for people. So it was the greatest mass exodus of people off the street that we'd seen in Australia's history into motel accommodation, but it didn't work. And the reason it didn't work is for the same sort of reasons that you see people coming in from overseas and living in hotel quarantine because they feel like they're in jail. Let me tell you, I've been working with people getting out of prison for the last 17 years, and it ain't like being in jail. That's a joke. You try living in something 4 times as big as that table and having 3 people living in there that you don't leave for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. That's another story. But what we actually started to find is that it's so much more complex than actually providing just a key in somebody's hand to be able to ensure that they've got permanent housing. Belinda mentioned Housing First, and that is a principle across the Western world where we provide opportunities for people to move into accommodation, and then we wrap around supports to make sure that they can maintain those things. We wrap supports around people to make sure that the complex nature of the issues they've experienced over their lives to bring them into the housing and homelessness sector are addressed. And whether that's mental ill health, or whether that's drug and alcohol addictions, or whether that's criminal convictions, or whether that's lack of affordability, poverty, the whole myriad of things, unless we've got supports that can actually address those sorts of things, it's all for nothing, because you can't just give somebody a key and walk away and expect that somebody who's been struggling with a lot of these issues, we'll be just able to find a magic fix. It doesn't work like that, and it takes a whole wraparound focus for a number of organisations to do that. And that's why I say the housing providers are no longer just tenancy management. They're no longer the group who just gives you the key and says, see you later until there's an issue. That's why these organisations and organisations like ourselves, to collaborate to ensure that everybody gets a little slice of the pie to be able to do their job and focus on their speciality of what we need to fix. The difficulty with people we're seeing sleeping rough, and I guess the most common cohort of people we're seeing is from probably 16 to 36, and generally males, because that's the people who are perhaps able to manage the risk of sleeping rough, and it is a risk when you sleep rough. Make no bones about it. It is risky, even if you're in sheltered accommodation. It is a risk because you're living and mixing with a whole heap of people who have got a whole heap of things going on in their life. When we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the important thing is the fundamental things of housing and security. People in that sort of a situation, when they're struggling, they're going to get an opportunity to think about when they're going to go to university or when they're going to hold their next cocktail party. It's not even on their landscape, it's not even in their vernacular, so people are actually focused on trying to make themselves safe. For a lot of people working in the safe space, and the safe space is 3 facilities that under Peter Gutwin's time in Parliament, we developed those and set up those for people to bring people off the streets. Now, 3 or 4 years ago, we had one of those events that we've had just recently. It was worse. The snow was down to about 200 metres. It was a gale. And we went to the Hobart City Council at the time and said, look, is there any way we can actually, extreme weather event, can we bring some people off the streets? The people who were sleeping on the streets, in the mall, in the parks, can we bring them off the streets? I have to say the Hobart City Council, we've been working with them for so many years now. They said, right, meet us in 10 minutes. So we went to Criterion House. My team went and organised all the bits and pieces to establish people in there for the night. You know, bedding, beds, food. I went home and wrote, back to work, seems like home, to write a whole heap of protocols about how we did that. So we took people out off the streets that night into Criterion House, which was already set up for, environmental emergencies, floods, fires, whatever the case may be. So we proved it to ourselves that few nights over that period that it could be done. And it's not rocket science, but it takes some organisation to get these things happen because there are risks associated with it. When you set up a safe space, you want to make sure that that's a safe space. But having said that, not everybody works in that environment. Not everybody, feels comfortable in that sort of environment. So we've had a number of people who would be, I'm just thinking about a couple of people who lived at Safe Space for quite a number of months. They would be in their early 70s, highly vulnerable in a health sense. Both of them were going through palliative care at the time. And for people who, I can sort of picture as my parents or, somebody's grandparents, it's awful to see that these people have got nothing, they've got nothing to fall back on, and they're subjected to have to bunch in with a whole heap of other people that they probably wouldn't have anything to do with in their lives. And it's really, really difficult because what do those people do? And what those people do is sometimes just don't go to places like that. They end up either sleeping in their car or they set up a tent. Now, I always say that camping is a wonderful thing to do for your weekend, but when it actually becomes your lifestyle, it ain't that easy. And one of the other hidden issues that we're seeing for people who are effectively itinerant, who don't have any housing, if you've got health complications, if you've got issues that you need to actually visit primary health and have an operation, it won't happen. The hospital will not do operations with people who are going to be discharged into homelessness because of the risk of not having somebody there to support them on their exit from hospital, and the chance of increased risk of infection as a result of not having all the things that we hold dear in our own house. And I'm just about to be crash tackled, so I'll be mindful. But it is one of the complex issues that we're seeing. If somebody is lucky enough to get into emergency accommodation, then move into transitional accommodation, they've got a pathway through to affordable housing. And by affordable housing, I mean community housing. They've got a pathway, they've got some hope. But the way our housing register goes is somebody can be on there. We worked with somebody who's got limited areas he wants to live, but he's been living in his car for 8.5 years now. Now, if I bring you back to a fundamental right being housing, how does that work as a community? And while we get great supports from our state government, from the federal government, from our local councils, I'm really pleased to see our new minister is very keen to talk to us and very keen to look at some of the solutions. But for me, it's a community approach. And the community approach, people come to me and say, what can we do as a community? And I always say back to them, the next time you're having a chat, whether it be around a board table or around a barbecue, have a chat about the real issues that people are experiencing in homelessness. Talk to somebody who's had that lived experience. Talk to them about what they really feel about it. They won't tell you any glowing stories about how good it is. Or, yeah, you should come and join me and come and live at Safe Space, or move into an overcrowded shelter, boarding room or whatnot. Talk to people and don't be scared to actually enlighten yourselves about what the real issues around homelessness are. Don't always believe what you see in the broadsheets or on the media. Talk to people who understand the issues. Sorry.
Thank you. I did say he's a wealth of knowledge and he's probably got lots more to share. But we'd like some questions. Beth.
Thank you. Beth Warren from Clarence City Council, and thanks, Don, that was really useful. A common response to homelessness is we should open up church halls and other community centres to allow people who are sleeping rough. Can you please explain some of the minimum supports that would need to be in place for us to be able to do that safely?
There was a project, and still is a project, going around rural Victoria called Stable One. Now, Stable One is a collective of different church groups who have church halls that are vacant most nights of the week. So what their approach is they have a stock of easily to assemble beds, and they take it in turns of having a different church group to open up their hall. It's not just about accommodation, like it's not just about giving a key to somebody to be able to end homelessness. The issues that come with and the risks that can come with opening up your church halls to that sort of stuff, absolutely well-intentioned, but they need to be supported. If you look at the funding that Safe Space down here in Hobart has just got, I think, $3.1 million for 1 year, which means they've got 2 separate facilities. They've increased their capacity to 40 people a night. Now, when we started up this concept a few years ago, we didn't even consider 40 people a night would be it. But what you need to have in those protocols and those risk matrices is to make sure that it is a safe space for both the people who are living there and both the people who are working there as well. And there's also reputation, issues like that. I think there's some really good organisations doing some great work in this space, but not everybody wants to move into that. And not everybody who presents with housing and homelessness issues fits Kay's model. Kay doesn't fit that traditional model, and we've got to be aware that there are a number of people who are self-medicating. There are a number of people who are not having treatment for mental ill health. There are a lot of people who are really experiencing some really complex issues at the moment, because if you have need of acute mental health care, it's really, really difficult to get it. If you're looking at treatment for AOD issues, alcohol and other drug issues, it's really difficult to get it. So what's happening is our criminal justice system is the first point of call for most of these people who are exhibiting those sorts of needs. And unfortunately, we're diverting a lot of those people, instead of getting therapeutic support, we're diverting through the criminal justice system, where they end up having a sway of different charges, and then they'll be sentenced to a period of incarceration, which some people don't mind because they get 3 square meals and a roof. And that's a sad indictment on our community if we see people who think that's preferential to actually finding good supports and accommodation.
Thank you for the question.
Hello, Don. My name's Emily Mallett, and I actually am coming to represent Minister Barnett here today. I just wanted to ask Don a question because I don't think it's been covered, but you have really good info to tell everyone. If the church community comes across someone who is in housing stress or has found themselves homeless, can you just guide them through what are the steps they could do for really practical, immediate support? Where should they help them turn to?
Since 2013-14, when the department set up Housing Connect. Now, Housing Connect is 5 stakeholders, traditional stakeholders: Centacare Evolve, Catholic Care, Anglicare, Colony 47, Hobart City Mission, and the Salvos. So it's a kind of a service TAS for housing. So if somebody wants to have any questions or any support, anything like that, Housing Connect is the front door of where you can go to get that sort of support. 1-800 588. I should know that off the top of my head. I know I should, but there's some literature about that. So when somebody goes to Housing Connect, it could be because I've been given a notification to vacate, or because I've got behind on my rent arrears, or because I just can't afford to live here, or because I'm homeless. A number of different things. What they'll be able to do, in the sense of somebody who's got arrears, they may be able to work with that person and actually address the arrears. They'll also put them into somebody for financial counselling and be able to support to pay off that. So it alleviates the pressure on that person getting a notification to vacate, which means that they'll be straight into homelessness and all sorts of issues. It's easier. Again, preventative support costs a lot less than actually people falling right into homelessness. It'll go through that process, and then it'll determine whether somebody needs support from a particular agency, and one of the 5 different agencies can have that person come through for support. Generally, when people come to one of our services for support, the housing is significant. It underpins everything. But when you unpack everything, the housing is this much. And the overwhelming trauma and stress of a lifestyle without hope, without certainty, is the big part of it. It's really difficult for our workers in the sector, because we don't have the opportunity to say, here's a key, here's the beginning of your solution. So we're in a mix and a fight with every other cohort and every other group in the community who's at just as much of risk, who's suffering as just as much trauma and significant unrest as everybody else. So it's a very difficult situation, and we've got to try and work closely with all the housing organisations and really come up with whatever solutions we can come up with. I've had a phone call, I won't out the person here, said, I'm living in a 3-bedroom house. I reckon I can rent out one of my bedrooms. And not because they want to make extra money, it's because they think, I'm in a position where I can support. So that comes to one of my case managers. My case manager has been involved with this person, but it's about finding that absolute right person. Because the last thing you want to do is invite someone into your home that's going to make your home life go pear-shaped. And there are the right people. If you think of Kay, any of us would take her home. If we had a spare bedroom, any of us would take her home, and she'd be a great asset to your family. Does that kind of answer your question? Yep.
Good question. Yep.
Thank you, Don. I'm Barb. I'm interested in what's happening with people with pets. I know pets are terribly important, and
yes.
My husband has some mental health issues, and if anything happened to us and we found ourselves homeless, he wouldn't go anywhere where he couldn't take our dog.
Barb, we see so many people who are in the same sort of a situation. Pets, when you become homeless, are your companion, they're your security, they're your best friend. They are so much more than just somebody you've got to feed pet food to, or something you've got to feed pet food to. And we see people who can't get into shelters, can't get into transitional accommodation, can't do the normal pet-friendly accommodation providers because there's barely any left who'll take dogs into a hotel room. So I guess that presents a barrier for people who are looking at housing opportunities, and certainly in the short term. I guess there's no easy answer to that, but we've got people who are living rough who will never leave their dog. And I know for people's mental health and sometimes security, their pets have saved their lives. And I can name you a number of people who've... There was a guy I can think of who was sleeping down on the Queen's Domain. His dog was growling one night inside his tent, and he got out into the moonlight. He saw somebody out there practising with a machete against the moonlight. Now, if it hadn't been for his dog, that guy was coming towards him. His dog gave a few growls and snarls and barks, and this guy took off. But out Centrepod, Dave, yeah. Look, everybody's got a story about that, and not every housing provider is able to take a dog. For some of the places that don't have a backyard, for the more high density one, it's much more difficult to have a dog. Yep, goldfish, potentially cat, dog, it's a bit difficult. Some of the new builds have got backyards, so they're perfectly adapted to have the right sort of dog. Safe Space will take dogs, but they've got to be in cages. Even Flint House there's 2 dogs there at the moment, but it's got to be a mix of how people can get on with their dogs, and dogs not impacting on the other people. But I see so many people who will not do anything with their dogs because it's like giving away children so you can get into a shelter. It's not going to happen.
We've got time for one more. Rob.
Yes, Don. We've spoken about homelessness quite a lot over the years, but one thing that you mentioned there, which was of interest to me, and I'm interested to know whether there's been any in-depth study of this. Aged care is obviously a real issue. People in their own homes who can no longer fully cope. They can't find an aged care place. But if they had just a little bit of help in the home, they might be able to stay there. How much has been done, to your knowledge, in terms of quantifying the number of people that are actually would be willing to take somebody on just to help them with a certain amount of things that they might...
Is living carer, do you mean?
Yeah, almost. But to the point where it's somebody who's looking for a home to live but can't afford it, can't afford the rent, but those bedrooms and those spaces are there. Could be issues with tax, because if they're going to charge for it, does that put them over the threshold? It's probably something that Andrew might have some insight into. What sort of effort has been put into quantifying that circumstance in our area, in Hobart or across Tasmania, that might actually help alleviate straight away some of people's homelessness situation?
Absolutely fantastic idea, Rob. It has been talked about it. The qualitative data is there to say that it's a great idea. The quantitative data is not there. They've talked about a number of issues like single person ageing in place, living in a 3-bedroom property. It's really, it's a difficult exercise to downsize that into a more purpose-built 1-bedroom. There are a number of different issues around. We can find, there's a lot of single units around the place. They're easier to find, but the demand in that area is a lot greater. But we're really struggling with bigger houses, the 3 and 4 bedroom houses and 5-bedroom houses. I had a family of 10 people, mum and dad and 10 children, all quite young. And where do you house people like that? We eventually found a house through the department, which was absolutely brilliant. But your idea of actually supporting those initiatives to support people in the homes is a great one. Again, it's like the gentleman who said, I've got a spare bedroom where that person like to move. It's around about finding the right person that also comes with the right supports.
Aren't they, to actually
I think it'd open up a can of worms if there was a, it'd have to be well organised, but I think the idea's got legs, for sure.
Good, thank you. Thanks very much, Don. That was really good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now it's your turn for a very short while. You can either turn to the people that you're sitting near and have a chat, or if you've got something that's really buzzing in your head, I want to see some writing on the board. So you might go, look, one idea that I had is, and write it up. And if other people agree with you, I want a few red stars beside it. So we're going to give you 10 minutes just to chat within your close group. I invite our guest speakers, even if they would like to write up one or two things up there that they could see could be action items, and see if we get some stars beside what you have written, and see where we come up to within 10 minutes. So that's all you've got. 2 minutes. You've got 2 minutes to finish on the board. Thank you.
Okay, so in about 1.5 minutes, we'll sit down again and have concluding words. So if you want to put something on the board or star something, do it now. Yes, I will. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And you can still add to the whiteboard after we've finished as well. Okay. We will preserve the ideas that have been recorded on the whiteboard. We will take a photograph of it before we rub it off. Thank you, everybody, for your participation in today's forum. And of course, we are especially grateful for the input of our two speakers, Belinda and Don. They've brought the balance of their knowledge, which is wide and deep because it's based on experience, the balance of that with their passion and commitment that comes along with that knowledge. So thank you again for that. And of course, the participation of each of you, our attendees today, has added a vital dimension to our time together, and it has been wonderful to have so many people involved in government at various levels to be able to participate in this today, and it has given a widened sense that this is a community matter that we need to work on as a community. I'll just mention before I forget that Belinda's frequently asked questions, there's some of those on one of the tables outside the two doors there, and there's also a document that looks like this, which some of you got earlier. It's called an epistle from the Tasmanian Council of Churches to Christians in Tasmania about shelter and homelessness. And following a forum that the Council of Churches held last year on this subject, David O'Halloran, the President, who has been unable to be here today because of a COVID-related issue, he wrote this epistle, which just means letter, I suppose gingering up people involved in churches, Christians around Tasmania, not to ignore this major issue. So there are those of us who are involved in churches, that's a very relevant thing for us. In addition, talking about gingering, the couple that actually got our little group going here at Hobart North were Stephen and Carolyn Robinson, and I think they're going to be out there near the doors to hand these to you as you go out if you want to. Cassie O'Connor, who for another COVID-related reason basically she had a booster that's knocked her out, was unable to be here today, but she did say for anybody experiencing housing stress, she wanted to let them know that they're very welcome to make contact with her. In the nucleus that formed here at Hobart North Uniting Church, we've said from the start that our aim is to find out how we can add our effective action to the many individuals and groups who have a concern and involvement with older women, and in particular to do that by engaging with those older women and in ways that are cooperative, collaborative, and do not compete unhelpfully with what others are doing. And one of the things that we've said in our little group that we would like to do is to have some kind of a situation, organise some kind of a situation where people who are experiencing or have experienced homelessness as older women can come and just talk in a relaxed way with members of the group. If you're one of those people and you would be prepared to do that, could you please let Chris know? Because that may well be something that we want to get going before long. Our group will meet here again on Thursday the 30th of June, and our focus will be to discern what are the next steps for our group, and some of this will certainly be taken into account at that meeting. So that is an open meeting, and what I've done is to put a couple of sheets on the two tables outside the door where you can record your contact details and particularly indicate if you would like to be to be regularly contacted as a member of this group as it expands, so you can find out what's going on and what you could participate in. So please take note of those. If you registered on Eventbrite, we've probably got your email address, but we don't want to make any assumptions about that. So if you want to have an ongoing connection, write on the sheet. I think it's fairly likely that there'll be several parallel lines of action that come out of this. It won't be just one thing that the group decides to do, but I don't want to preempt the work of the group now. I think just all I need to do now is to thank people involved, and a special thanks to Chris, who's been our excellent MC for what's going on today, and a very special thanks to Glenn down the back there, who's looked after our sound and vision so expertly too. And who's there? Denise. Thank you, Denise. Thank you to Jeff, the minister of our church, who's here today as well, and is very permissive to the various things that we do in these buildings. Thank you to Lorraine Brinkman and to Andrew Glenn, who helped with the catering, and again to all of you. Go well. Thank you.